Well, it certainly has been a tumultuous year for the South African economy. The country slipping, as we know, into technical recession, but then managing to somehow slip out of it in the third quarter of 2018. We'll unpack that in a moment. Then we have the Reserve Bank hiking interest rates and the revised downturn of the economic growth forecast for the year. So let's bring in the experts on this. As always, it's a pleasure to have Azar Jammine, Economist, joining us here on the Sunday edition of Newsnight. Azar, good to have you with us. I know you're going away, so I'm very glad we could steal you before you vanished for the rest of the holidays. Just before we talk economy, you've heard, obviously, the story about Edcon. I imagine it's a worrying story, knowing how big the company is in an economy like ours. Not good news when you're hearing reports, even if they're being denied by the CEO.
It's a worrying report, not only because of Edcon, but also because of the property industry as a whole, because it does show that we've seen an overexpansion of retail space generally over the last few years, and that these are the kind of consequences that you could get. I know the causes of the Edcon story are slightly different, and there was a private equity issue, but also the property market has been taking a bit of a hammering, the commercial property market. Certainly the shares have been very dicey, and we see why. And especially the inclination now for people to switch to online retail trading is going to take even more business away from the physical retail shops.
I wanted to hear your thoughts off the back of hearing Grant Patterson speaking to Marcel Gordon earlier. Now, however, back to, is it good news? We're out of the recession? I mean, are we popping the champagne?
You know, I think we overstated the relevance of the recession. The fact that we were in recession was a technical aspect in that we had 2 consecutive quarters of negative quarter-on-quarter growth, which would not have been the case had it not been for a statistical further decline in agricultural output in the second quarter. Excluding agriculture, we would have had positive growth. The bad news, however, is that really, let's not get excited. The growth rate is abysmally low and below the growth in the population, which means that on average living standards are declining. Population growth is 1.6% and the economy is growing by less than that.
So you're not overly optimistic for 2019?
I'm I suppose cautiously optimistic that there may be a little bit of an improvement. Certainly agriculture might see some improvement. The fall in oil prices and the resultant reduction in fuel prices is a nice little short-term boon to the economy, and we may have another big cut at the beginning of January if we're lucky, which will help. But really, we're also concerned about a slowdown in the world economy that's not going to help.
Before we talk perhaps about the world economy, I'm so glad you mentioned the opening fuel price. For those who don't know and haven't done the maths on this, correct me if I'm wrong, Azar, the difference between the year's opening fuel price and that peak we had in, what was the third week of October, 18%. I mean, I know it's come down a bit now, but that was a hell of a jump.
It was a hell of a jump, but we're going to be close to zero on a year-on-year basis by the beginning of January if things carry on the way they're doing this month in terms of oil prices and the rand-dollar exchange rate.
So it's good news for Christmas, but do you think if we're going to go on a zero-sum game for now, it went up steeply, it's come down almost just as much, do you see that same sort of pyramid effect next year? Is this just the cyclical fluctuations?
It's very difficult at this stage to say. I do believe that there is a risk that the rand-dollar exchange rate may depreciate over the course of next year, in which case we could see fuel prices starting to rise back again. But really, it's a small issue in relation to the structural impediments facing the economy. And the latest one, of course, is the Eskom story and the uncertainty this is creating. What we were really hoping for would drive economic growth upwards is more direct investment. Instead, the data we got on Friday showed that capital investment fell by 5.1% in the third quarter of this year.
Why was that?
People are losing confidence. The whole debate around rand expropriation without compensation, the uncertainty around the mining charter and what is needed in order to invest in mining. And now most recently, of course, we didn't have that in the third quarter yet, but it's going to linger. The dearth of investment is the fear that we may not have enough energy.
I didn't realize, perhaps that was my fault, I didn't realize the rating agencies, Moody's and S&P, etc., were looking at something like land expropriation to the point where that could affect our rating with them. I knew they would look at energy and they would look at, obviously, the mining charter, but land expropriation, because it's so unclear what it is as far as government's concerned, I didn't realize they weigh it so much. Well,
they weigh it in two ways. Firstly, it jeopardizes the perceptions regarding the institutional integrity of South Africa's institutions, and especially, in this case, property rights. Secondly, they see it as potentially being negative for capital investment. And if it's negative for capital investment, it's negative for economic growth and job creation, and you get a vicious cycle of declining growth. And declining growth is bad for them, because the lower the growth rate, the less government gets in tax revenues, and the more inclined it will be to have to borrow more in order to fund its expenditure, and that lifts our government debt level, which in turn jeopardizes the solvency of the government in the long term.
You never want to hear about governments borrowing more money. Perhaps as we begin to wrap up, let's just talk about this turnstile effect we had of finance ministers this year as well. I mean, that's the only way it can be referred to now. It really was one in, out, and we are where we are now. 3 finance ministers, I mean, how much did that really affect the economy, or did it perhaps have a positive effect because Ramaphosa came in and cleaned house? Which way did that weigh up?
I wouldn't see that specific issue as being as negative as some of the other issues that I've highlighted, such as land expropriation, such as the mining charter, such as uncertainty regarding national health insurance scheme. Of course, one could say that actually one should have been glad that we got rid of a certain finance minister before it was too late, and replaced him with the second finance minister, who was at least had people had more confidence in him, and it was unfortunate the way he resigned, and now we've got a third one that some regard as being a loose cannon, but he has established some credibility in the international arena in the past.
And just very briefly, how do you see that looking for the finance minister going into next year? An election year, so he has to be careful how he balances political rhetoric with what South Africa and the government can afford. What would you do if you were advising him?
If I was advising him, I would say he needs to be a little more careful in some of the pronouncements that he makes, and carry on the way he did in generating confidence in the Reserve Bank when he was Reserve Bank governor. And I think we could see a restoration of some confidence in National Treasury, which would then help confidence generally, and the ability to avoid further credit ratings downgrades, which would force interest rates up still further and economic growth still down even more.
Free advice for the finance minister. I'm sure he's watching. It's a Sunday evening. What else is he doing? Of course he's watching Newsnight. Azar, thank you very much. Indeed, have a wonderful festive season. Have a good break. We'll chat to you again next year, no doubts. Azar Jammine joining us here on Newsnight.